My name is Lester Anderson, and it's been a year since my world shattered into a million irreparable pieces. To say it simply blew up isn't entirely accurate. I played a significant role in its destruction. I orchestrated its downfall and then walked away amidst the chaos, with the assistance of about 60 accomplices who shared in the deceit. My wife, sadly, was among those collaborators, and there was a twisted satisfaction in seeing them all brought down alongside her. Before this seismic shift in my life, I was blissfully unaware, a content husband deeply in love with his wife, relishing in the joy of our shared existence. Our 5-year marriage seemed like a dream, a cozy home, cherished friends and neighbors, fulfilling careers, and supportive families. Financially secure, we were building a future together, but that future took an unexpected turn. I wish I could offer some rationale, a thread of logic to unravel the enigma of our relationship, but the truth eludes even me. She was my college sweetheart, kind, funny, and affectionate. She never displayed any inclination toward infidelity, never flirted with other men, nor dressed provocatively. I never once questioned her faithfulness. I'm employed in a research and engineering lab specializing in cutting-edge electronics for prestigious clients like NASA and the military. We affectionately refer to it as Geek Central. The interesting thing about us geeks is that while we thrive in the complexity of our professional lives, we keep things refreshingly simple at home. What you see is what you get. There's no elaborate facade because, frankly, we're not skilled in the art of deception. Some might view our demeanor as somewhat adolescent, and perhaps by conventional standards, it could be seen that way. We find joy in corny jokes, revel in quoting obscure movies and literature, and have a penchant for diving into intricate details. Despite any veneer of sophistication we may possess, we don't rank highly in the realm of social finesse. However, one thing we hold sacred is our commitment to honesty. In our world, honesty is not just a virtue, it's the cornerstone of our reputations and, consequently, our careers. Geeks don't lie. We understand that our credibility is paramount, both personally and professionally. My wife, Sandra, is employed in high finance at a firm called Wilson & Wilson, a major player in financing large-scale construction projects across the mid-Atlantic states. Despite their significant influence in the industry, I've noticed that many of Sandra's colleagues lack the academic pedigree I would expect. While they possess a solid grasp of financial matters, and some excel at spreadsheet programming, I often find myself feeling out of place when conversing with them, reminiscent of my high school days. A particular incident involving our decision to name our 2 kittens Oscar and Nat highlighted this divide. One of Sandra's coworkers suggested we should opt for names of more renowned figures, exemplifying the disparity in our perspectives. In their world, it seems status and conformity reign supreme, leaving me feeling like an outsider. Sandra and her colleagues are adept at navigating the intricate webs of finance, where every detail is meticulously documented, and personal ambition often takes precedence over individual integrity. The discomfort I initially felt among Sandra's coworkers escalated during the office Christmas party held at the nearby Marriott Hotel. Amidst the free-flowing alcohol and mingling crowds, distinguishing between employees and spouses became increasingly challenging. Overhearing a woman casually mention her work husband struck me as a stark reminder of the collective mindset prevalent in Sandra's professional circle, where alliances are formed for personal gain and loyalty is often fleeting. While I may not have harbored animosity toward them initially, events like these gradually eroded any semblance of goodwill I once held. It was an unsettling remark that caught me off guard. My initial instinct was to whirl around and identify the speaker, but a sudden urge to remain inconspicuous seized me. Stop, listen, don't react. Blend into the background, a voice in my head urged. We'll all have the next week off, but I suppose we'll manage without crossing the street, one of the women quipped, prompting laughter from both. You could always conjure up a minor account emergency, another chimed in, eliciting even heartier laughter. What did they mean by crossing the street? Were they insinuating they'd need to return to work during the Christmas party festivities? The cryptic conversation troubled me, stirring a sense of unease. Despite my discomfort, I reassured myself, I made the right choice in marrying Sandra. Whatever they're implying, it can't be good. With that, I pushed the unsettling thoughts aside and rejoined the revelry. For the next 3 weeks, the incident slipped from my mind. However, on a Friday evening, as I ascended the carpeted stairs from our basement, I overheard Sandra's voice from upstairs. "All right, I'll take care of it. What's a wife for, after all?" she chuckled. Wife. What's that supposed to mean? I wondered aloud, turning the corner just in time to see Sandra hanging up the phone. What was that all about? I inquired, striving to keep my tone free of accusation. She visibly startled as I approached. "Oh, that was Martin Harris. It's work-related. I need to head into the office tomorrow, and we'll have some late nights next week. There's an opportunity to assemble a funding package for a new apartment complex they're planning on J Street," Sandra explained. The memory of the cryptic conversation from the Christmas party resurfaced in my mind. "Sounds like a minor account emergency," I remarked. Sandra chuckled. "I wouldn't exactly call it an emergency, but it's an opportunity we can't afford to miss." I couldn't help but express my disappointment. We've both been putting in long hours this year. I was hoping we could take it easy this month and spend more time together. "Sweetie, please don't be upset. These opportunities don't come around often. You have to seize them while you can, or they slip away," Sandra reassured me. "I promise I'll make it up to you." Her mention of wife caught me off guard. What's with the wife talk? I thought you were my only wife. How many husbands do you have? I quipped, trying to inject a bit of humor into the conversation. A flicker of surprise flashed across Sandra's face as she realized I had overheard her. Attempting to mask it with a smile, she reassured me, "Just you silly. It's something we say at the office. We joke about seeing more of our work partners than our actual partners at home. It's just a little office humor. Everyone says it." Despite her attempt at reassurance, her trembling hands betrayed her underlying unease. "I'll just go in for a few hours tomorrow to kickstart things, and then we'll have the rest of the weekend together," she promised, her smile strained. The remainder of Friday night passed quietly, and Sandra left for the office on Saturday morning as if it were any other workday, albeit dressed casually. However, our promised weekend together didn't commence until after 7 p.m. Saturday night. Now, don't misunderstand me. I appreciate hard work and the importance of meeting deadlines. However, what troubled me was the sense of secrecy permeating our marriage. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was far more secrecy in our relationship than I had ever suspected. As I waited for Sandra to return home on that Saturday, my thoughts revolved around this newfound realization. Despite regularly sharing stories from my work and recounting anecdotes I'd heard, I suddenly became acutely aware that Sandra never divulged anything about her own job. It dawned on me that she had erected a substantial barrier between her work life and our home life, a divide I had never truly comprehended before. When my wife finally arrived home on Saturday night, she headed straight for the shower while I got started on grilling some steaks. Despite my attempts to focus on cooking, my mind remained fixated on that unsettling wife remark. Even if it was meant innocently, it rubbed me the wrong way, leaving me feeling irked. 2 phrases from the Christmas party continued to replay in my mind like a broken record. One was "work husband," and the other was "crossing the street." I couldn't shake the nagging question of whether these phrases held literal or figurative meaning. Considering Sandra's office location, I couldn't help but ponder the possibilities. Across the street were 2 prominent buildings. The first, a sizable medical practice, and the other, the Marriott Hotel. It dawned on me that many individuals at the Christmas party seemed intimately familiar with the layout of the hotel, sparking a flurry of unsettling thoughts. While I tried to rationalize their frequent visits as business-related lunches or client accommodations, my sour mood led my imagination down darker paths. That week, feeling an overwhelming need for a break from the lab, I made a conscious decision to have my lunch in the solitude of my car. As fate would have it, my parking spot happened to be conveniently located just a block away from my wife's workplace, affording me a clear view of the street stretching between her office and the Marriott. What unfolded before me left a bitter taste in my mouth. Around 11:45 on Monday morning, just before the lunch hour, I observed several couples strolling across the street and disappearing into the Marriott. By 12:30, the sane couples leisurely made their way back to their respective offices. Not a single group of 3 or 4, just pairs. While I didn't catch sight of my wife among them, my unease only intensified. The following day yielded a similar sight, different couples, but the same suspicious behavior. I entertained the idea of investigating further by observing the hotel lobby, but the risk of being recognized, particularly by Sandra, deterred me. In a move born out of desperation, I took a step I never imagined I would. That very afternoon, I enlisted the services of a private detective named Tristan Howard. I briefed him on what I had witnessed and outlined my desperate need for answers, providing him with a photograph of Sandra. His advice was as perplexing as it was disconcerting. Don't dwell on it. Resume your normal routine and trust that if there's something to be found, it will reveal itself soon enough. Though I voiced my hope that my suspicions were unfounded, I returned to work, grappling with a torrent of emotions. My investment in Tristan's services proved worthwhile. Thursday morning, he sat me down in his office and delivered the grim truth. On Wednesday morning, at precisely 11:45, my worst fears were confirmed. My wife entered the Marriott lobby with Martin Harris's arm draped around her waist. A fleeting stop at the reception desk secured them a key before they ascended to the 4th floor, not re-emerging until close to 12:40. Tristan, with his knack for gathering discreet information, had a private conversation with the desk clerk, shedding light on a disheartening truth. My wife and her alleged work husband were frequent guests at the hotel. This revelation came at a swift cost of $300, a mere down payment according to Tristan, who cautioned me that obtaining incontrovertible evidence would come at a higher price. Despite my internal turmoil and self-loathing for entertaining such suspicions, I resolved to pursue ironclad proof, even if it meant delving into the darkest corners of my thoughts. To achieve this, Tristan proposed a plan involving cooperation from the desk clerk and strategic room rentals. He would ascertain the room my wife and her colleague would occupy during their next visit, renting the adjacent rooms to install discreet video surveillance. It entailed additional expenses, a bribe included, but I was willing to pay whatever it took to uncover the truth. The past 7 days had been excruciatingly painful. I attempted to distance myself from Sandra as much as possible, yet she couldn't help but notice my erratic behavior. Brushing off her inquiries with vague mentions of work, I doubted she bought my flimsy excuses. Despite my efforts to maintain a facade of normalcy, my heartache was palpable. When Sandra expressed a desire for intimacy, I reluctantly obliged, convincing myself that if I hadn't discovered anything concrete yet, perhaps there was nothing to find. But as we made love, my heart was heavy with a mixture of anger and anguish. It felt like my marriage was unraveling before my eyes, and yet I lacked concrete evidence or a plausible explanation for my suspicions. Tristan's call from the clerk came as a bleak confirmation of my worst fears. He secured the room for the following Wednesday morning and evening, and I found myself sitting in his office on Thursday morning, clutching the evidence that shattered my world. Watching the gut-wrenching 40-minute video of my beloved wife, the very center of my universe, engaged in intimate acts with her supposed work husband Martin Harris, left me utterly devastated. In moments of turmoil, a geek's mind can wander down strange paths. I recalled an old joke about a husband discovering his wife's infidelity and threatening her lover with a gun, saying, "Don't laugh." "You're next," but I vowed to maintain a sense of order amidst the chaos. They would face the consequences of their betrayal, and I would find the strength to walk away. Before confronting the situation head-on, I knew I needed some time away. Being under the same roof as Sandra felt suffocating, unbearable, so I arranged to take the rest of the week off, citing a need to be down at Wallops for the weekend if anyone asked. With that sorted, I hastily packed a bag, left a note behind, and embarked on a journey westward. Thankfully, I had a childhood friend, Lucas, residing about an hour past Baltimore, who graciously offered to host me for the weekend. I breathed a sigh of relief, knowing I wouldn't risk encountering Sandra while at home. In my current state, I couldn't fathom feigning normalcy. It was all I could do to keep my emotions in check, to gather my thoughts, and devise a plan. Ironically, leaving that note was the first instance I ever lied to my wife, and it weighed heavily on my conscience. but in that moment, escape was imperative, and I wasn't ready to reveal my hand just yet. As I drove westward, I found myself grappling with profound questions about the woman I thought I knew so well. Had she mastered the art of compartmentalization to the extent that she could justify having two husbands? One thing became abundantly clear. My wife had mistaken trust for naivety. I had never been naive, and deceiving a husband who placed unwavering trust in her was hardly a feat. The days of blind trust were over. My marriage lay in ruins, awaiting its inevitable funeral. Childhood friends possess an uncanny ability to see through facades. They know you inside out, your past, your present, and your innermost thoughts. There's no hiding from them. Within minutes of my arrival at Lucas's place, he read the turmoil etched on my face. Sharing the devastating news, his reaction mirrored my own seething anger. But it was his wife, Tiffany, who urged us to temper our rage and approach the situation with clarity. She didn't defend Sandra. Rather, she implored me to reflect on my desires and avoid acting impulsively. A true understanding of the social dynamics at play often requires a woman's perspective. While my fury was directed at my wife and her alleged work husband, Tiffany's focus expanded to include the broader context of the workplace. In her eyes, it was the women who held the power over sexual dynamics, either actively participating or turning a blind eye. She quipped, "Men are pigs, and it's up to women to civilize them," sharing a knowing smile with her husband, who reluctantly concurred. "I want to bring them all down. I'm divorcing my wife, that deceitful, unfaithful woman. She's betrayed me, and it's clear this isn't her first offense. I want to inflict pain on every single one of them. I want to make Mr. Martin Harris regret ever being born with a shred of decency, and I want every adulterer in that office to rue the day they chose to betray their vows." Tiffany attempted to inject some rationality into my seething anger. Be absolutely certain you're prepared for the consequences. There might be factors at play that you're unaware of. Perhaps she'll be consumed by remorse and never repeat her actions. You love this woman enough to marry her. Do you truly want to throw it all away now? Think it through. Reluctantly, I produced the damning evidence, and together we watched the footage. Martin Harris, a mere pencil pusher, his domain was the realm of finances. While I dedicated myself to evening runs, he indulged in extravagant dining experiences. Martin Harris was anything but formidable. For 40 agonizing minutes, we bore witness to my wife surrendering herself to her supposed work husband. It was a soul-crushing experience. She wore a smile, even shared laughter, while I felt as though my world was crumbling around me. As the video concluded, a heavy silence settled over the room. I turned to Tiffany, seeking guidance. "How long should I ponder this?" I asked, desperate for clarity. She simply shook her head, enveloped me in a comforting embrace, and silently began preparing dinner. Lucas had pursued a career in law, an irony not lost on me. Yet he remained a loyal friend, and for that, I forgave him. His wife, a high school science teacher, possessed a surprisingly analytical mind. Over the course of the weekend, we engaged in countless discussions, and with their invaluable assistance, I began formulating a plan. Calling Tristan, I outlined my intentions. It would come at a cost, but with patience, it was feasible. We devised a strategy to divide my wife's office into two groups: management and those closely affiliated with Sandra, approximately 10 individuals, along with their respective work spouses. My goal wasn't merely to scorch them. I wanted to obliterate them. The remaining employees would feel the repercussions, albeit without draining my savings. Tristan would discreetly install cameras in the offices of management and the targeted coworkers, while the others would be captured on film entering and exiting through the lobby. When the time came to file for divorce, I would take legal action against the company, exposing the indiscretions of every employee's spouse. Throughout that weekend, I agonized over whether I had missed the warning signs. There must have been signs, I reasoned. She never appeared cold or indifferent. She was always supportive when I shared details about my work. Could she truly lead a double life without remorse? Was she perhaps a sociopath? Her jittery reaction when I confronted her about the wife remark on that fateful Friday suggested she was well aware of right and wrong, or at the very least, cognizant of potential consequences. I struggled to comprehend how anyone could sustain such duplicity without succumbing to a nervous breakdown. Somewhere amidst my contemplation, a troubling thought surfaced. By leaving town, I had unwittingly provided Sandra and her alleged paramour the ideal opportunity to use our home for their illicit rendezvous. Anger surged within me before I swiftly realized the futility of dwelling on it. In the grand scheme of things, their actions were inconsequential. I had already made up my mind to divorce her, irrespective of her current behavior. I resolved to leave her the bed, out of sheer practicality, and claim what was rightfully mine from the rest of the house. Steelier than ever, I braced myself for the forthcoming deception as I embarked on the drive home Sunday night. To save on expenses, we opted not to capture footage of the work spouses in their hotel rooms more than once, except for my wife and Mr. Harris. This minimized the number of room rentals and reduced the time required for Tristan's team. When it came to Sandra, I wanted to eliminate any possibility of her dismissing her actions as a one-time occurrence. In just 2 weeks, we achieved our objectives. Those weeks were excruciating. I loathed every moment. Some may question whether one instance was sufficient for retribution. While it certainly would have been, my desire for revenge extended beyond Sandra and Mr. Harris. I sought to expose the complicity of the entire office, the individuals who knew of my wife's infidelity yet remained silent. Uncovering their deceit required additional time. Most work spouses rendezvoused once a week, with some being more frequent visitors to the hotel across the street and others less so. While we didn't catch them all, we captured enough to serve our purpose. Sandra and her accomplice adhered to a strict every Wednesday schedule. To distance myself from the pain, I pretended to work late on numerous evenings. However, the ache of being home was unbearable. I concocted fictitious emergencies, supposedly requiring me to travel to Wallops on Thursdays, yet in reality, I spent those nights in a hotel near my workplace. On Friday nights, I sought solace in visiting Lucas and Tiffany once more, and on Monday nights, I returned to the hotel, seeking refuge from the torment of home. Sandra began to voice complaints about feeling neglected, and our relationship gradually turned icy. Little did she know the depth of that chill. Despite her efforts to maintain a facade of normalcy at home, I was emotionally distant, and it reflected in her demeanor. Seeking refuge, I relocated to the guest room for sleeping and made a point to leave the house early each morning. After all, I had my own set of deadlines at work. Perhaps Sandra sensed the strain in our marriage, or perhaps she bought into my flimsy excuses, or maybe she simply didn't care. Regardless, it didn't deter her from continuing her Wednesday lunches with her work husband. If anything, their lunch breaks only seemed to lengthen. It became evident that infidelity ran rampant in her workplace, with a significant portion of the staff, including many in senior positions, engaging in extramarital affairs. It was a case of the rots starting from the top, as the saying goes. Months later, upon reflection, I realized a glaring absence in the 3 videos I had viewed. Not once did they mention me. Neither he nor she spoke ill of me or felt the need to defend my honor. What stung even more was the sight of her wearing her wedding rings throughout those encounters, a silent testament to her indifference towards our marriage. It was as though I were invisible, non-existent in that aspect of her life. While there was a semblance of tenderness between the two lovers, it felt hollow, lacking the genuine intimacy one would expect from a committed relationship. They were more than mere casual partners, yet fell short of being true lovers. The moment I witnessed my wife and her work husband saunter through the lobby, his arm possessively around her waist, heading towards their rendezvous, I knew the marriage was beyond salvaging. Watching them engage in their tryst confirmed there would be no room for discussions, excuses, or worn-out cliches. I was resolved to obliterate not just our marriage, but also her entire workplace. I had no interest in hearing her apologies or witnessing her tears, and the mere notion of it being solely about sex was abhorrent. 4 encounters would shatter any delusions of her fidelity. My lawyer meticulously drafted the legal documents, while Tristan handled the rest. At precisely 10 o'clock on Monday morning, a process server strode into the offices of Wilson & Wilson, serving both Sandra and Martin Harris at their desks. With a deliberate stride, he proceeded to the CEO's office, where he served the company itself. It's almost ironic in hindsight. The CEO, Simon Wilson, was complicit in the very infidelity I sought to expose. At 67, he had a trophy wife scarcely half his age. What drove him to seek solace in the arms of a 45-year-old secretary remains a perplexing enigma to me. My phone incessantly buzzed at 10:20, but I silenced it without a second thought. Meanwhile, 5 of Tristan's operatives commenced distributing manila envelopes to the genuine spouses of every employee at the company. Some received photographs, others videos, accompanied by detailed reports they could utilize in divorce proceedings. Martin Harris' wife was given a particularly substantial envelope. For others, a letter served as a wake-up call, enlightening them about the unsavory activities unfolding at Wilson & Wilson, should they wish to confront their spouses upon returning home. Each envelope bore a brief note. In the spirit of transparency, you can thank Sandra Anderson for bringing this to our attention. I couldn't help but wonder how many allies my deceitful wife would have come Tuesday morning. Wilson & Wilson's demise was swift and profound. Following my lawsuit against the company, a deluge of 20 additional legal actions ensued. Divorces proliferated throughout the office like a raging inferno, consuming even marriages where evidence of infidelity was absent. Management's attempts to terminate employees tainted by the scandal only unveiled their own complicity in the debacle. Innocent individuals departed rapidly, seeking to salvage their tarnished reputations. The media seized upon the spectacle, and within 2 weeks, an article chronicling the firm's downfall prominently featured the term work spouses. I couldn't help but speculate about the source of that phrase. Perhaps it was coined by some clueless husband, ignorant of the realities of corporate culture. Business dwindled in the wake of the scandal, culminating in the closure of the office within 2 months. For nearly a year, the once bustling building stood eerily vacant. Eventually, I found myself seated across from Sandra in my lawyer's office. Tears streamed down her face as she attempted to convey remorse. After weeks of receiving a barrage of angry messages, punctuated by denials, pleas, and futile attempts at bribery and negotiation, she finally assumed a modicum of accountability for her actions. She attributed her transgressions to the allure and atmosphere of high finance. I struggled to comprehend the correlation between her infidelity and the financial sector, but evidently it was ingrained in the culture. However, her apology was short-lived. In a baffling turn of events, she attempted to shift blame onto me, asserting that my failure to communicate my concerns contributed to the situation. Ridiculous. You shouldn't need to remind your spouse to abstain from engaging in extramarital affairs, let alone cultivating a so-called work husband in the first place. Sandra's infidelity remained a perplexing enigma to me, as she never provided a satisfactory explanation. All I could discern was that she had undergone a profound transformation. The once bright-eyed and seemingly honest woman with a passion for business had morphed into a deceitful and duplicitous individual, seemingly guided by the mantra, "What he doesn't know won't hurt me." Tristan informed me that their liaisons only occurred on Wednesdays during their lunch breaks, and they hadn't seized the opportunity to meet during my absence from home that weekend. It was as if Sandra adhered to some twisted form of dual marriage, where cheating was constrained but not entirely eradicated. Tristan attempted to rationalize her behavior, suggesting it might be a perverse form of bonding ritual. Wilson & Wilson fostered a toxic corporate culture where team building was synonymous with intimate connections among coworkers. There seemed to be a distorted sense of loyalty at play, where employees confined their extramarital activities to a single individual, often their closest colleague. Tristan speculated that they perceived themselves as intellectually superior, sharing a clandestine knowledge or engaging in collective risk-taking. Whether it was a shared secret or a warped social contract, I struggled to comprehend. Despite my efforts to make sense of the situation, I couldn't shake my emotional investment in both my marriage to Sandra and the circumstances surrounding our divorce. I faced a choice: to spend a lifetime grappling with the complexities of these individuals or to simply walk away. Ultimately, I opted for the latter. My quest for revenge didn't unfold as I envisioned. While I emerged victorious in my legal battles, the company coffers were barren, and Martin Harris faced near total devastation in his divorce proceedings. The irony wasn't lost on me. My own actions had precipitated the financial downfall of both the company and Harris, rendering them incapable of satisfying the legal judgments against them. My wife, stripped of her job, sought alimony upon our divorce, but my lawyers successfully argued that her unemployment was a direct consequence of her infidelity, and she was denied any financial support. Even the betrayed spouses, though wounded by their partner's betrayal, harbored resentment towards me for exposing the unpleasant truth, placing me squarely in their line of blame. It was an unforeseen consequence in a vast city where I could exist without their affection. However, one individual's reaction caught me off guard. Emma Harris approached me one evening at a bar, radiating an undeniable allure that captivated my attention. She introduced herself and took a seat beside me, her intentions palpable. "I'm divorcing my husband, but I want more than just revenge," she declared. "I want to confess to him that I slept with his mistress's husband. Will you assist me in this endeavor, Mr. Anderson? What do you say, Lester? Will you defile me and aid in humiliating the man who betrayed your wife?" After some contemplation, I acquiesced. As it turned out, it was a decision I didn't regret. Sandra's family initially directed their anger towards me, but I decided to confront the issue head-on by showing them the incriminating video. Witnessing her betrayal firsthand, they were overcome with emotion, offering apologies and shedding tears. Ultimately, they absolved me of blame for the divorce, although they attempted to persuade me to grant Sandra a second chance. However, forgiveness eluded me. I couldn't recall Sandra ever asking for it, and my heart remained hardened for over a year. Reflecting on the events during my divorce, I couldn't help but feel a sense of irony. Despite my expertise in high-tech electronics, it was rudimentary methods, a parked car, a bribe to the desk clerk, and off-the-shelf miniature cameras that exposed Sandra's infidelity. It was a stark reminder that even the most advanced technology couldn't prevent betrayal in matters of the heart. Reflecting on how effortlessly I stumbled upon their deceit, I couldn't shake the thought of how easily they could have concealed their affair. It dawned on me after overhearing a couple of conversations. From that point on, their indiscretions were glaringly obvious. Couples nonchalantly crossing the street displayed a brazenness that bordered on arrogance. It begged the question, did anyone care about appearances anymore? It seemed almost inconceivable that they had managed to evade detection for so long. It made me question whether the world I inhabited bore any resemblance to the reality around me. Were such affairs commonplace? In the realm where I worked, those who boasted of their romantic conquests were usually solitary figures, their only companion being their own hand. Once again, I found myself relegated to the sidelines, observing the antics of the cool kids from afar. Occasionally, I catch glimpses of Sandra in passing, whether on the streets or in stores. We never exchange words, and I remain oblivious to her current endeavors. When our eyes meet, I see a flicker of sorrow in hers, but I can't bear to hold her gaze for long. The mere sight of her still tugs at my heartstrings, a reminder of the life I once knew that now lies in ruins. I've turned a corner, embarking on a journey of starting anew. Like a detonator igniting an explosion, I set events in motion that tore apart not only our relationship, but also my own sense of self. The second story. Attending my wife's office party had its ups and downs. On one hand, I relished the opportunity to unleash the power of my Challenger on the open road, yet the faster I sped, the sooner I'd reach the destination I dreaded. The event was slated at the company lodge, accessible via a serene 20-mile stretch of road, free from the interruptions of stop signs or traffic lights. It was just me and the Dodge, racing towards the gathering, albeit with no pit stops in sight. Candy and I had been growing apart ever since our daughters tied the knot. I had hoped for our bond to strengthen, but alas, it seemed destined to fray. Despite my reluctance, Candy insisted I accompany her this time, though she had previously attended such functions solo. Unlike her, I wasn't much of a drinker or a social butterfly. Over the past year, suspicions of her infidelity had lingered in my mind, yet I found myself indifferent. Perhaps this indifference was a symptom of our drifting relationship, as I quietly sought an exit strategy from this unhappy marriage, a means to sever the ties of a fading affair. I must confess, I likely played a role in my wife's decision to seek a different path. I've always been a bit of an oddity, a peculiar sort of minimalist. Growing up in a financially challenged family meant my siblings, and I lacked the typical childhood extravagances like bikes, toys, or fancy gadgets. It was akin to an Amish lifestyle without the religious doctrine. While I grasped the workings of the conventional world, I couldn't quite conform to its norms. I prioritized avoiding debt, paying bills promptly, and squirreling away savings for the future. Living comfortably as a minimalist doesn't demand fanaticism, but it does necessitate restraint. A few indulgences here, and they help maintain an appearance of normalcy to the outside world. For me, the greatest indulgence was my marriage and family. Finding a partner who could tolerate my quirks and accept my idiosyncrasies was no small feat. Candy, with a background similar to mine, was accustomed to a frugal lifestyle. While not as enthusiastic about it as I was, she managed to tolerate it. However, over time, she seemed to gravitate towards normalcy, becoming less frugal and more conventional, particularly after our daughters came along. To avoid standing out as peculiar, we opted for a modest, sensible home and upgraded our attire. Candy even began indulging in occasional hairstyling and makeup, honing her grooming skills. We acquired 2 smartphones, models from the previous year, to fit in with societal expectations. As our daughters matured, Candy decided to enter the workforce, securing a minimum wage office job. Since transportation was essential, we acquired a compact Honda Civic for her, mirroring my own vehicle. Her earnings barely covered the car expenses, lunches, and the new wardrobe demands. It balanced out, and I found contentment in that. My name is Michael Johnson, a moniker as ordinary as they come. I diligently serve as a parts puller at a local company specializing in industrial compressors. Though the work is monotonous, I derive satisfaction from it. Despite being offered promotions, I declined without informing Candy, content with my current position and salary. A clandestine indulgence of mine was prudent retirement planning. Whenever possible, I discreetly purchased 1-ounce crugerants, amassing over 30 of them in my basement safe, with plans to continue. My final indulgence was a 1970 Dodge Challenger left to me by my late brother Travis, who tragically perished while working on an offshore oil platform. Though I managed its upkeep alone, the insurance premiums were exorbitant. Candy flourished at Gilbert Industrial, receiving regular raises and promotions. Initially, she shared details about her job enthusiastically, but gradually, her discussions about work dwindled. I sensed something amiss but couldn't pinpoint it. Tonight, I hope to gain insight into the situation. The company gathering resembled a retreat spanning a weekend. I felt distinctly out of place, begrudgingly attending. Despite having crossed paths with all of her associates at some point, I harbored no fondness for any of them. Exiting the interstate at Holbrook, I seized the opportunity to unleash the power of the Challenger. Predictably, she responded with vigor. Candy, however, seemed uneasy with the speed, though she refrained from voicing her discomfort. Yes, I did push past the speed limit. No, I wasn't bothered by it. Mike, what's the rush? We have ample time. Maybe ease off the throttle a bit, Candy urged. I'm not in a rush to arrive. You know I didn't want to go in the first place. I'm just giving the engine a proper workout. It needs it every now and then, I explained. Please don't dampen the mood. This weekend is crucial for my career. Mrs. Griffin emphasized your presence is vital too, she insisted. Lois Griffin, spouse of the company's president, Oscar Griffin, hailed from a lineage of old money and business traditions. Why? I pressed. What do you mean? She countered. Why is my attendance crucial at this event? I fail to grasp it, I reiterated. Mike, it's important for you to understand the dynamics of my new role in the company, so you can support me effectively, she clarified. I'm still not following, I confessed. My new position comes with unique challenges. Lois suggested you be gradually exposed to them, so you can fully comprehend and support me. It might be overwhelming at first, but she's confident you'll grasp it eventually, she explained. I've always had your back. What's different now? I inquired. My new role demands more from both of us. Lois believes gradual exposure will help you navigate it alongside me, she reasoned. As we pulled up to the lodge, my heart raced with anticipation. Candy's unspoken message was crystal clear. It was going to be an intriguing weekend. Upon arrival, Candy swiftly made her way into the lodge, leaving me to handle the luggage. I couldn't shake the feeling of being put in my place. "Hey there, Mr. Johnson. Sweet wheels you got. Is that a 70 or 71? Wally Bailey, the company's jack-of-all-trades, greeted me. "Hi, Wally. 70, I replied. Wally then introduced me to his wife, Margaret. They were seated on the front porch, seemingly avoiding the crowd indoors. Scanning the parking area, I counted roughly 16 cars and one weathered truck at the far end. Our conversation veered towards the Challenger for the next few minutes. "Why are you two out here? Shouldn't you be inside with everyone else?" I inquired. "Not our scene, Mr. Johnson. We were hoping to make an early exit, but Mrs. Griffin insisted we stick around. We came up early today to lend a hand with the setup. Caterers packed up about an hour ago," Wally explained cryptically. "Care to elaborate? What's going on?" I pressed. "Something's off, but I can't quite put my finger on it. Hate to say it, but I reckon it's got something to do with your wife," Wally whispered. "Planning on staying the whole weekend?" I asked. "Nah, that's why I parked my truck on the side. Easy exit strategy," he replied, adding another layer of intrigue to the unfolding mystery. "Well, I better haul these bags up to our room. Give me a heads up before you leave, all right?" I requested. "Sure thing, Mr. Johnson. And watch your back. Don't do anything rash," Wally warned. Thankfully, it was only a couple of small bags to carry. Inside the lodge, Mrs. Griffin greeted me with a smile and a wave. Candy, visibly impatient, waited at the top of the stairs. "Finally, Mike, we've got a few hours before the evening event. Freshen up and put on something nice. Tonight's going to be special, and I want everything perfect," she instructed. "I think I'll take a stroll around the property to unwind for a bit, if that's all right. I'll be back in time," I proposed. As I exited the room, I couldn't help but notice a smirk playing on Candy's lips. The intrigue was escalating with each passing moment. The crisp air added a pleasant touch to my stroll. As I counted the cars, my estimate matched up: 16 vehicles, predominantly Mercedes with a sprinkle of Jaguars and a lone Lexus. 4 of them boasted out-of-state plates. It puzzled me how my wife, in her current position, could seamlessly integrate with such affluent circles. We were clearly out of our league, and a nagging sense of unease settled in. Observing Wally and Margaret loading their bags into the truck, I approached for a chat. "Looks like Mrs. Griffin gave you the green light to leave," I remarked. "Not exactly. We're making our exit under the radar," Wally replied. "I'm feeling a bit uneasy here, Mr. Johnson. Wally suggested we stay, but I convinced him otherwise," Margaret chimed in. "I'd appreciate it if you could stick around until after the evening buffet. I'm feeling a bit apprehensive myself, and your company would be reassuring. 2 heads are better than 1, right, Margaret?" I attempted a feeble joke, earning a bashful smile from her. "I think we can manage that. Besides, there's crab and oysters on that buffet line," Wally added, hinting at his culinary preferences. I had a feeling I was going to enjoy Wally's company. I complied with my wife's insistence on dressing up for the occasion. Just before we reached the buffet, our hostess linked her arm with mine and guided me to a secluded alcove. "We're delighted you decided to join us tonight to support Candy. This marks a significant milestone in her career, and your unwavering support is crucial. The salary and benefits package she's receiving are quite substantial, and I'm certain you'll be pleased," Mrs. Griffin explained warmly. "Pardon my curiosity, but what exactly is the position we're discussing?" Candy's been rather elusive whenever I inquire, brushing me off with promises of explanations tonight, I queried. "No need to fret, Michael. I believe she simply wants to surprise you," Mrs. Griffin reassured. "You haven't quite answered my question," I persisted. "Well, there's no official title per se. You could say she's taking on the role of a personal assistant," Mrs. Griffin disclosed. "I see. Well, the buffet looks tempting. Thank you for the clarification, Mrs. Griffin," I responded. Lois. Please call me Lois, she insisted warmly. I proceeded to enjoy the spread for the next hour, while Candy busied herself mingling with the influential guests. This afforded Wally, Margaret, and myself some quality time together. As we were wrapping up, Mrs. Griffin approached. Michael, Candy mentioned you brought your sleek little car tonight. Would you mind making a quick booze run for us? She asked. I nodded with a smile. Of course, Lois. What do you need? There are 3 cases of wine waiting at the ABC store in Holbrook. They're already paid for, so it should be a straightforward pickup. If any issues arise, just give me a call. And don't forget your phone, she instructed. I'll let Candy know and head out right away, I assured her. As Mrs. Griffin walked away, I caught Wally's eye. Meet me outside in 5, I whispered. Candy simply smiled when I informed her of Mrs. Griffin's request, offering a casual reminder, don't forget your phone. It struck me as curious that both she and Mrs. Griffin emphasized the same detail. Wally, I need a favor, I said, tossing him the keys to the Challenger. You serious? Wally's eyes lit up. Take it down to Holbrook and grab those 3 cases of wine from the ABC store for Mrs. Griffin. I've got a feeling there might be a hiccup that delays things if you catch my drift, I explained. Wally grinned knowingly and nodded in agreement. Here's my phone. Just leave it on the dash. If it rings, ignore it, and whatever you do, don't turn it off. Clear. I handed him my phone. How long should we be gone? Wally inquired. At least 2 hours, and make sure to fill up the gas tank before heading back to the lodge. Enjoy the drive, I replied. The evening air carried a slight chill, but I was grateful for the comfortable jacket I'd thrown on. Now all that was left to do was wait and observe. From various vantage points on the back porch, I could catch glimpses of the lodge's interior. I wished I'd brought a thermos of coffee, but that level of foresight eluded me. Finding a cozy spot where I could observe without being spotted, I settled in. Candy seemed to command the center of attention, though I still couldn't discern the reason behind it. She appeared radiant, laughing and engaging with guests as if she were a Hollywood star. 20 minutes later, I noticed Mrs. Griffin and Candy scrutinizing Candy's cell phone. It was clear what they were up to, checking my location. Meanwhile, thanks to Wally, I was well on my way to Holbrook. Their smiles and Mrs. Griffin's raised hand hinted at some form of approval from the room, though I couldn't quite make out the details of their conversation over the distance. It almost seemed as though there was a quiet, collective nod of agreement among the guests, a subtle form of applause. Oscar Griffin approached, clasping Candy's hand. Together, they ascended the main staircase, their hands raised in a victorious gesture, accompanied by laughter. The room erupted in cheers as they made their way up the stairs. With the Challenger still about an hour and a half away, I resolved to make the most of my time. My trusty buck pocket knife, a cherished gift from my daughters a decade ago, was always at my side. Made of sturdy steel, it maintained a keen edge. Surveying my surroundings, I decided to start with the cars nearest to the lodge, taking care to work meticulously. There was no need to rush. Each valve stem was carefully removed and stowed away in my jacket pocket. 16 cars, 64 valve stems in total. With nearly an hour left, I pondered how to occupy myself. 4 cars remained locked, but the others were accessible. Retrieving the registration slips proved an easy task, whether tucked into visors or stowed in glove compartments. Though unsure of their future use, I deemed them worth keeping. With 30 minutes remaining until Wally's return, I turned my attention to the spare tires. Since I had access to the cars, the trunks were open to me as well. Within 20 minutes, 10 more valve stems were added to my collection. Surprisingly, 2 cars lacked spare tires altogether. I'll admit, my actions were petty and immature, but they provided a small sense of satisfaction. I've never been one for confrontation, preferring instead to operate in the realm of subtle and underhanded tactics. I didn't feel the need to assert my masculinity or portray myself as a hero. Let the alpha males take on that role. 20 minutes later, the Challenger returned with Wally and Margaret, both seemingly pleased with the excursion. As anticipated, there was indeed a delay at the ABC store, and it appeared to be pre-planned. Not a single call came through to my cell phone during their absence. I switched it off and removed the Scion card. They were eager to depart, and I bid them farewell, strongly advising Wally to seek alternative employment as soon as possible. I suspected the cases of wine in the truck were quite valuable. To avoid any accusations of theft, I promptly placed all 3 cases on the lodge's front porch. The journey home was tranquil. There wasn't much of importance left at the house, just a few personal documents, my laptop, and my crugerance. Initially, I had considered setting the house ablaze before departing, but I didn't want to martyrize Candy in any way. Within 2 hours, I was back on the road. There was no need for a farewell note or leaving behind my wedding ring. Let her puzzle it out on her own. With no particular destination in mind and no sense of urgency, I embarked on a 2-day drive. By Monday morning, I made the decision to call into work and tender my resignation. I requested that my final paycheck be forwarded to my parents' house in Carlisle. Needless to say, my abrupt departure didn't sit well with my employer, but I offered no explanation beyond a simple apology. A reliable breakfast at Waffle House was always a comforting constant. While perusing a local merchandiser paper over my meal, I stumbled upon an intriguing help wanted ad for a nearby supermarket. They were seeking someone to stock shelves from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. After breakfast, I decided to check out the market, located in a quaint, older section of Chattanooga. Driving around the neighborhood for the next hour, I admired the charm of the older craftsman cottages and spotted a few mobile homes scattered about. While a small trailer could suffice, I was hopeful for something a bit more substantial. Fortuitously, I came across a sign advertising a garage apartment for rent. Though the garage wasn't included, I negotiated an additional $50 a month for access. The apartment itself was modest, a 1-bedroom unit with a half bath. Furnishings included a bed, dresser, table, and chairs. The rent was reasonable and the location ideal, so I decided to seize the opportunity. I could address the lack of a full bath later. At least I now had a home for the challenger. The job situation at the supermarket was unique. While they had plenty of applicants, they were hesitant to leave just anyone alone in the store overnight. I laid out my circumstances to the owner without sugarcoating anything. What sealed the deal was my willingness to work off the books, without benefits, and at $1 less than their preferred rate. Surprisingly, they didn't even ask for my social security number. It was a win-win situation. I was happy, and they were satisfied. Plus, the supermarket was conveniently just a 10-minute walk from my new apartment. The remainder of the day was spent settling into my new abode. The landlord kindly provided me with the access code to his internet, which I appreciated. A brief visit to the local Goodwill yielded some kitchen essentials and a small microwave, along with linens and cleaning supplies. That evening, I made the decision to cancel my life insurance policies, though I opted to leave banking and credit card matters untouched. After all, what harm could she really do? With both of our daughters now married, my departure felt slightly less burdensome. Though we hadn't yet welcomed grandchildren, I suspected it wouldn't be too long. I reached out to my daughter, Batty, to reassure her of my well-being. While she knew I had left, Candy hadn't divulged any further details. Batty assured me she'd keep her sister, Alice, informed. Deleting all calls from my wife, I powered off my phone once more. Feeling the grime of the day, a shower sounded heavenly. Perhaps tomorrow would be the date for that. Not everything fell seamlessly into place. Securing a safe location for my gold became a priority. While the value of my stash may not have been substantial in the grand scheme, its significance to me was paramount. In a somewhat peculiar twist, I ended up securing a safety deposit box in Huntsville, Alabama, hoping to obscure any connection to Chattanooga. My hopes of remaining incognito were dashed when it became apparent that the two locations were indeed linked. Nevertheless, I found solace in the notion that I had made an effort. Despite the nearly 2-hour drive, I didn't mind the trip. Though the garage door at the apartment provided some security, I took extra precautions by installing a new hasp and a heavy-duty lock. My cherished vehicle needed protection, after all. Adjusting to my new job was relatively swift. Initially, I had a colleague working alongside me for the first 3 nights, but soon found myself flying solo. Tasks in the produce and meat departments were minimal, but the frozen food section posed its challenges. However, after a couple of weeks, I had everything under control. To address my showering needs, I opted for a Planet Fitness membership, which set me back $20 initially and $10 a month thereafter. The downside? They required a credit card number. This necessitated another trip to Huntsville to obtain a credit card from my new bank. It was becoming apparent just how difficult it was to completely vanish off the grid. Clearly, some adjustments were in order. Uncertain of the lengths Candy might go to in her search for me, if at all, I resolved to cross that bridge when I came to it. Before long, I had my nightly routine down to a science. Clocking in at 10 p.m. and wrapping up at 6 a.m., I'd make the 20-minute jog or 30-minute stroll over to Planet Fitness. Initially, my membership was primarily for the shower facilities, but gradually, I found myself gravitating towards the other gym equipment. By the end of the first month, I was clocking nearly 2 hours of exercise daily. Not only did I feel physically better, but I also noticed a slight reduction in weight. While I never considered myself overweight, shedding some flab was a welcome bonus. It was comforting to slip back into a routine. I grew accustomed to my new job and found a sense of contentment in its monotony, oddly finding a certain charm in its repetitive nature. It's difficult to articulate, but perhaps you can grasp what I mean. I did my job efficiently, and in return, they granted me the space to work independently. Planet Fitness proved to be an excellent choice. Swiftly, I discerned which exercises I enjoyed and which ones I preferred to avoid. Heavyweights held no appeal for me, and as I jogged to the gym daily, the treadmills lost their allure. I kicked off each session with the Planet Fitness circuit workout, a brisk 30-minute routine. Following that, I dedicated 20 minutes to the C2 rowing machine, another 20 to the stair stepper, and concluded with the final 20 minutes on an upright bike. I never bothered with a TV, but I did invest in a used desktop computer with a decent-sized monitor. Most evenings, my entertainment revolved around watching YouTube videos. While I didn't spend much time cooking, I noticed my eating habits slowly evolving towards a quasi-keto diet. Coupled with my unconventional working hours, I inadvertently found myself incorporating intermittent fasting into my routine. After 3 months, with an improved sense of well-being and some weight loss, I decided it was time to reconnect with my daughters. This time, I dialed Alice's number. "Hi, Alice, it's your dad." "Well, it's about time. We've all been worried about you. Are you all right?" "Yes, I'm doing great. Don't worry about me. I've always been able to take care of myself. I'm calling to check on how your mother is doing." "Mom's doing fine. She got a raise at work and seems to be enjoying her job. But she's really angry with you. She said you abandoned her at her promotion celebration and left home like a wounded child. Those were her exact words. She thinks you're jealous of her success." "Well, I'm sorry, but I can't add anything to that. Until she's ready to tell you the truth, that's all I have." "She mentioned that things are a bit tight financially without your income, but with her raise, she thinks she can manage." "I'm glad to hear she's doing well. Did she tell you anything about her new job?" "Just that she's making more money and traveling more." I fell silent. After a brief pause, Alice resumed, "Will you be home for Christmas?" "I don't think so. I'll try to send something for you and Batty." "We don't need or want anything, Dad. We'd rather have you here." "Sorry about that. I have to go now. Tell Batty I said hello. Bye." I found myself in a bit of a funk. It seemed my daughters didn't quite grasp the complexity of the situation and placed the blame squarely on my shoulders. While I wasn't thrilled about being painted as the villain, I didn't feel obligated to justify myself. It became increasingly clear that there was no remorse on my wife's part, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of bitterness. According to my daughter's account, Candy was thriving without me, which left me puzzled as to why she even wanted me back home. I drowned my sorrows with a case of black and tan over the weekend, noticing a gradual uptick in my beer consumption. However, as the weeks passed, things began to look up. I excelled at my job and received an unexpected raise. With free rein over my responsibilities, I swiftly streamlined and improved the stock replenishment system. My weekly reports proved invaluable to the company, guiding inventory levels and reordering intervals. While the store's computer system handled these tasks automatically, my manual input was appreciated. My living situation suited me perfectly and remained well within my budget. I shed some weight and started building muscle, even catching a glimpse of a six-pack in the right lighting. Opting to let my facial hair grow, I now sported a full head of hair long enough to tie back into a small ponytail. My entire demeanor seemed to have shifted, exuding a newfound sense of confidence and perhaps even a hint of intimidation. My gym sessions were becoming more manageable and stretching out a bit longer. Unexpectedly, I began forging a few acquaintances at the gym, though I was cautious, particularly around the female gym-goers, to avoid any potential impropriety. With the guys, it was all good-natured banter and teasing. We enjoyed poking fun at each other regularly. However, amidst this camaraderie, an unlikely connection emerged. Her name was Judy, or so everyone called her. Not particularly sociable, she rarely engaged in conversation with anyone except me. Each morning, she embarked on an intense workout regimen, eschewing the frills of a yoga-style routine. From what I gathered, she appeared to be in her mid-40s, tough-looking, always clad in sweatpants and a sweatshirt, a stark contrast to the other women flaunting their figures in tight, revealing attire. I endured my fair share of teasing for being the sole male she interacted with at the gym. While I didn't actively seek out her company, I also didn't rebuff her advances in any way. I'll admit, her attention did flatter me somewhat. Despite several months passing without contact with either my daughters or my wife, I couldn't bring myself to reach out. Instead, I diverted my attention to expanding my Krugerrand collection with multiple trips to Huntsville. However, a shift in the wind was on the horizon. "Michael, can I have a word with you?" Judy's use of my full name caught me off guard. She was the only one who called me Michael instead of Mike. It was unusual, to say the least. "Of course, Judy. What's on your mind? How can I assist you?" "There's something I need to discuss with you." We found a bench and settled in. "I have a company event to attend on Friday evening, and I need an escort. I'll cover all expenses and provide transportation, since I've noticed you don't drive. If necessary, I can also reimburse you." I hesitated momentarily, and Judy sensed it immediately. "Did I say something wrong? I apologize if I did." "No, not at all. It's just that there are a few complications in my life, so to speak. If you can overlook them, I'd be glad to help." "Okay, what are the issues?" "Firstly, I'm married." "Oh, I see. You never mentioned a wife. I suppose that changes things." "Not necessarily. I wanted to be upfront with you. I haven't seen or spoken to my wife in over 9 months. I'm not even sure if we're still married." "Have you filed for divorce or separation?" "No, I haven't." "All right, what else?" "I don't have any appropriate attire. No suits, jackets, dress shirts, or formal shoes. I don't own any of that stuff because I don't have a use for it." "That's not a problem. I can take care of that. That's why I'm asking a week in advance. I work nights, but I believe I can get the evening off without any issues." "I'm glad to hear that. What else? Do you want me to shave or anything?" "Michael, I like your beard and your hair, but you do look a bit unkempt. Would you mind if my stylist gives you a once-over on Friday afternoon?" "A stylist?" I groaned but nodded in agreement. And so began my association with Judy, professionally known as Judy Walker, attorney at law. On Tuesday, I found myself at Jos A. Banks, a step up from my usual haunts thanks to Judy's prior arrangement. I walked out with 2 pairs of pants, 2 sport coats, a couple of shirts, a few ties, and even added 2 turtleneck shirts to the mix, something I've always fancied. Judy had taken care of the prepayment. On the way home, I swung by to grab a new pair of respectable shoes and some fresh underwear to accommodate my recent weight loss. Opting for moccasin-style shoes, I ensured they were still classy enough for the occasion. Come Friday, my visit to the stylist went smoothly. The stylist was amiable and skilled, leaving me with a neatly trimmed beard and transforming my ponytail into a short, modified mullet. I couldn't pinpoint the exact style, but it was longer in the back, and he assured me it would be easier to maintain. I found myself quite pleased with the result, though the stylist didn't say much about Judy except mentioning I was a lucky guy. Judy arrived punctually at 6, beeping from her Lexus outside my apartment, a stark contrast to the neighborhood. Opting for the gray jacket and matching turtleneck, I thought I looked rather dapper, though I lacked any real point of reference. I was grateful Judy was driving, as I wasn't familiar with the city's routes. Judy, before we head in, could you clarify what exactly my role is tonight? The initial hour will likely involve socializing. You don't have to dive into that scene. Most of the attendees will be pretentious snobs you'd rather avoid. Just stick close to me and keep the creeps at bay. Be subtle, but don't let anyone push you aside. Make sure I always have a drink in hand, whether it's ginger ale or mineral water. Stay pleasant and agreeable, and whatever happens, don't lose your cool. Essentially, you're my arm candy. Let them believe we're a couple. I've never thought of myself in that light. I don't have much experience with this sort of thing. Do you think you can handle it? Absolutely. Oh, is there any food? After about an hour, we'll be served a $500 plate of rubber chicken and sit through some speeches. After that, there will be more socializing. By the way, you look great. It dawned on me that I hadn't complimented her on her dress or hair. I truly felt out of my depth. The initial part of the evening unfolded just as Judy had described. Surprisingly, I found my role to be less daunting than expected. The room buzzed with single, well-dressed men flaunting their expensive suits and watches. Judy, looking stunning as ever, attracted a fair share of attention from these suitors, most of whom knew she was unattached. They approached her cautiously, testing the waters. Channeling my inner Charles Bronson, I gave them a stern look, which surprisingly deterred them. Every time I left Judy's side to refresh her drink, another opportunist swooped in. Some even brought her drinks, which she discreetly passed to me for disposal. Judy cast a few glances my way, her smile somewhat ambiguous. Finally, it was time to sit down. Suddenly, a parade of 300 chicken dinners appeared out of thin air. It was a dismal excuse for a meal. I'm not typically a picky eater, but this was subpar. With each bite, I couldn't shake the thought of the $500 price tag. Judy leaned in, whispering, "Michael, want to ditch this joint?" Attempting a Bogart accent, it fell flat. I didn't reply. Instead, I rose from my seat, took Judy's hand, and we slipped out quietly. I doubt anyone even noticed. As we reached the parking garage, Judy kicked off her shoes and tossed me the keys to the Lexus. "Find us some real food, Michael," she said. 20 minutes later, we found ourselves at Hillbilly Willie's, indulging in a full rack, each accompanied by a long neck. Judy didn't shy away from the Tabasco, and we both disregarded the side of fries, opting for the eagerly welcomed bibs instead. Amidst our feast, I couldn't help but notice an oddity. Judy's evening gown boasted long sleeves, a rarity among the other women's attire, which predominantly featured short sleeves or none at all. Yet she remained barefoot, seemingly unfazed by the unconventional choice. As we dined, things quickly returned to a comfortable normalcy. Though my evening with Judy was enjoyable, it lacked any hint of intimacy. Our dynamic at the gym remained unchanged, with friendly banter and mutual encouragement. 3 weeks later, Judy enlisted my company once more for another function requiring an escort. I readily agreed, feeling compelled to explain the situation to my boss, who found it rather amusing. Understanding the circumstances, he assured me that seeking permission for time off was unnecessary. A simple note would suffice. Essentially, he left me to manage my own schedule responsibly. Judy's rigorous daily gym routine was evident. She maintained a high heart rate and perspired profusely despite her fully clothed attire. While most female gym-goers opted for sports bras and shorts, Judy preferred sweatshirts and long pants. Though it struck me as unusual, I decided not to broach the subject. Our second outing mirrored the first, minus the food and with an increase in libations. With more drinks came a surge of unwelcome attention from eager suitors. Each new arrival seemed to bring another cocktail for Judy, keeping me occupied as I discreetly disposed of the unwanted beverages. However, one particularly persistent individual tested my patience. I pulled him aside and issued a quiet warning that if he made another advance toward my supposed fiancée, he'd face consequences. After that, he and many of the other unwelcome guests vanished for the remainder of the evening. I hadn't realized I could be so intimidating. Following the event, we opted for sushi, devouring a hefty $40 worth of sashimi. Despite the lack of romantic involvement, it was yet another enjoyable, platonic evening. 2 days later, Juby caught me off guard during my rowing session. "Why didn't you inform me that we were engaged?" I felt a bit awkward yesterday when some of my colleagues asked about it. Without waiting for a response, she flashed a smile and continued with her workout. I decided to reach out to my daughter Batty for an update. She mentioned that Candy had been avoiding both her and Alice. All Batty knew was that Candy's schedule involved frequent travel and that visitors had become a regular occurrence at the house. When I inquired whether her mother had initiated divorce proceedings, Batty admitted she had no clue. It had been weeks since either of them had heard from Candy or Alice. I found myself consumed by anger for reasons I couldn't quite grasp. With each emptied bottle, my frustration only intensified. The following morning, fueled by my irritation, I visited the post office and shipped off 74 valve stems to Oscar Griffin at Gilbert Industries in a flat-rate box. Alongside the stems, I included a brief note: "Thanks for a memorable evening." Though more than a year had passed since the party, I was certain he would recall the incident. The hangover from my drinking binge led me to skip the gym that day. I couldn't bear the thought of working out with a pounding headache. The next day, Judy grilled me with questions about my actions, prompting me to promise her an explanation during our next dinner together. True to my word, she picked me up at 6 that evening, and we dined at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, an upscale establishment unfamiliar to me. I made an effort to dress appropriately for the occasion. Throughout the meal, Juby listened attentively, refraining from passing judgment. I returned to my apartment in time for my work shift, feeling grateful for her understanding. At the gym the following day, Judy inquired whether I knew any of the individuals present at the lodge on the night of the party. When I mentioned that I had the names and addresses of everyone in attendance, she seemed intrigued. After our workout, she stopped by my apartment, where I handed her an envelope containing 12 car registrations. Gratefully, she kissed me on the cheek before departing. Judy worked as a personal injury lawyer, a fact she tried to explain to me without much success. Instead, I teased her about the potential cost of her assistance. In response, she simply planted another kiss on my cheek, leaving me with more questions than answers. 3 days later, I received a call from my daughter Alice. She informed me that Candy had reached out to her, desperate to locate me. It seemed that Candy was embroiled in some kind of workplace crisis and urgently needed to speak with me. Alice, however, remained tight-lipped about my whereabouts. I couldn't help but wonder if Oscar had received those valve stems. Immediately, I dialed Judy and informed her that I would be picking her up in 20 minutes. Her office was situated in an upscale strip mall, not too ostentatious, but undoubtedly classy. Judy had never laid eyes on the Challenger before. The topic of my car ownership had never come up in conversation. As she stepped out of her office, the rumble of the engine drew curious stares from her colleagues. I greeted her with a smile as she approached the car, and we exchanged amused glances at the attention. "Well played, Michael. Well played." Judy chuckled as she settled into the passenger seat. "Perhaps you'll be wanting an engagement ring next," I teased as we pulled away from the curb. "In due time. Let's not rush things," she replied with a grin. I maintained a steady pace until we crossed the Tennessee River, at which point I decided to let loose a bit. Route 72 leading into Huntsville provided a scenic drive, though not ideal for showcasing the Challenger's capabilities. Within 2 hours, we found ourselves seated at Dreamland, ready to enjoy a hearty meal. "Michael, everyone who was at the lodge that night has been served legal papers today." "What do you mean served?" "It's a lawsuit. Technically, it's termed as malicious conduct contributing to the deterioration of a marriage." "Is that even a real thing?" "It seems so. They've met all the criteria. Their behavior was deliberate, extreme, and caused you significant emotional harm. Maybe that's why my wife seemed upset." By then, our plates were stacked with succulent ribs from dreamland, and conversation tapered off. Judy finished her last rib and looked up. "Why was your wife upset?" "My daughter Alice called earlier. Candy needed to speak with me urgently about a work issue she's caught up in. I'm in the dark about the details." Oscar Griffin and Gilbert Industries are being sued for $1 million. The others are facing suits of $100,000 each. I hate to sound cynical, but do you think that'll really pan out? It might not be straightforward, but I have a feeling some interesting developments will unfold. I eyed another long neck but refrained, mindful of the drive home. Judy, on the other hand, indulged in her lager, relishing the moment. Feeling a tad adventurous as we exited the restaurant, I casually proposed to Judy if she'd like to stay the night and head back in the morning. "I'd love to, but I can't," she responded. "We could leave early," I suggested. "That's not the issue. Let's just head back now. I'll fill you in on the way." The first 20 minutes of the drive were silent, but then Judy began to share. 8 years ago, she weighed close to 300 pounds and chose diet and exercise over bypass surgery. Remarkably, she shed 140 pounds but was left with 20 pounds of loose skin. It took 5 surgeries to remove it, leaving her with scars all over her body. Despite being a bold and outspoken woman, she admitted feeling self-conscious about her scars, avoiding dating and male company. For some inexplicable reason, she felt comfortable with me, though she couldn't pinpoint why. I dropped her off at her house, walked her to the door, and planted a small kiss on her cheek. She thanked me for the meal, a tear glistening in her eye as I left. Our platonic dating continued, and both of us seemed content with it. Nickajack markets were thriving, having expanded to 2 additional stores within 2 years and seeking more. When they offered me a full-time position as inventory manager for all 3 units, I accepted, despite the condition that I become a regular hire, requiring me to go fully legal. At that point, legality didn't seem to matter much, and Judy was pleased, which made me happy. Several more weeks passed without hearing from my daughters until I received a short text message on my phone. "Mom got fired." That added a layer of complexity to the situation. Now that I had a regular job with a decent salary while Candy was no longer employed, I worried about getting the short end of the stick in a potential divorce. But then things took a turn for the worse. "Michael, I have some good news for a change," Judy said, her tone serious, capturing my full attention. "What is it?" I asked eagerly. 3 of the 11 people we sued have settled," she explained. "What does that mean for us?" I inquired. Since we were seeking only $100,000 in damages, their insurance companies advised them to settle to avoid public litigation. "It's covered by their insurance, so it's not a significant personal loss for them," Judy clarified. "So, does that mean we might actually get some money out of this?" I asked, hopeful. "Yes, Michael, I've already received 3 checks, and there might be more coming," Judy confirmed. "Do you think this might have influenced Candy getting fired?" I pondered. "I'm fairly certain it did," Judy replied. "Will this affect my divorce proceedings?" I questioned. "Have you filed yet?" she probed. "No, not yet. I was actually going to ask you to help me with it," I admitted. Judy's face broke into a wide smile. "Michael, pack a small bag and get the Challenger ready. We're taking a road trip to see your wife. We'll leave early Thursday morning." Now, I couldn't help but smile too. We departed at 6 a.m. and checked into the Sheraton 10 hours later. The Challenger hummed contentedly. I called Alice and arranged for Candy and Batty to join us for lunch at the Reading Motor Inn the next day. The atmosphere during supper was a tad awkward. We indulged in selecting dishes off the Red Lobster menu, enjoying ourselves perhaps a bit more than planned, but considering it a celebratory occasion. Our conversation meandered through various topics, both of us carefully skirting around the elephant in the room. This was our first night together after over a year of being friends without benefits. The last thing I wanted was to make Judy feel uncomfortable. While I'll spare you the intricate details of the evening, I can confirm it wasn't nearly as daunting as we had imagined. Both of us felt a bit rusty, but managed to navigate through it with the expected outcome. Judy appeared relieved that I didn't find her off-putting, and I was glad it wasn't as awkward as she had feared. We were two happy fools, sharing a late breakfast together the next morning. As we arrived at the table, Candy and the girls were already waiting. I was dressed in one of my new sports coats paired with a dark turtleneck, feeling rather sharp. Judy opted for a lighter business suit, projecting a casual yet professional air. The looks of amazement on my wife's and daughter's faces were hard to miss. Candy, Alice, Batty, meet Judy Walker, my attorney and confidant, I introduced, feeling the weight of the situation. Before any small talk could commence, the waiter approached to take drink orders. "I'm not hungry. Just coffee, please," Candy spoke up first, setting the tone for the rest of us. "I'll have the same," I concurred after a quick scan around the table confirmed the unanimous decision. "It's good to see you again, Mike. Care to catch us up on what you've been doing?" Candy's words dripped with a hint of sarcasm, and Judy nudged me under the table. "Just working, giving you the space you needed," I replied, with Judy's support evident. "You abandoned me when I needed you," Candy retorted. "You needed someone, but it wasn't me," I countered. "Mom, Dad, enough. Why are we here?" Alice intervened firmly. I realized this meeting wouldn't last long. Feeling lost, I looked to Judy for guidance, but she remained silent, taking charge of the conversation. Judy reached into her purse and handed an envelope to Candy. "Mrs. Johnson, this is a divorce petition. It's fair. I suggest you have your attorney review it," she said calmly, initiating the next step in this difficult process. Batty and Alice wore expressions of astonishment, clearly caught off guard by the unexpected turn of events. But Candy, she had a smug grin plastered on her face. Instead of accepting the envelope from Judy, she retrieved a similar one from her purse under the table. "You idiot. I divorced your sorry behind 8 months ago for desertion," Candy spat out, her grin turning into a smirk. "You never got a copy because I didn't know where to send it. It's final. Whatever you've got here is worthless. And trust me, there's nothing you have that I want." The waiter arrived with our coffee and an urn, just as Candy stood up. Flashing a smile at Judy and me and giving the girls an odd look, she left both envelopes on the table. "Dad, can we stay for lunch? I've heard they have great quiche here," Batty suggested, breaking the awkward silence. Judy and I chuckled, agreeing as we asked the waiter for menus. Over lunch, Judy, Batty, and Alice engaged in lively conversation while I felt like I was dining alone. Women had always been a mystery to me. Before long, the girls exchanged phone numbers, promising to stay in touch. Back at the hotel, I began packing. "Michael, I thought we were staying another night," Judy remarked. "We are, but not here." "Hurry up and pack," I replied. An hour and a half later, we were in Elton, Maryland. 30 minutes after that, Judy Walker became Judy Johnson. We spent the night in Luray, Virginia. I wanted to keep driving, but we didn't make it. We found a house with a 3-car garage, but that's a story for another time. The girls later told me that Candy had a meltdown upon learning that I received $2 million from Gilbert Industries. She ended up moving to Iowa. Go figure. The third story. My brothers-in-law and I occasionally gather for an evening of poker. It's not a regular event, and we only manage it a few times a year. Recently, our wives went on a shopping trip together, giving us the perfect opportunity to play a few hands. My wife, Janet, has a sister and a brother. That particular evening, her brother, Christian Nelson, invited David Phillips to join our game at Chris's house. Chris sat to my left, and David was across from me. Both David and Chris are lawyers at Nelson, Preston, and Peterson, the most successful law firm in the area. Janet's father, Jacob, was one of the original partners. Years ago, he bought out the other partners, so the firm is now entirely controlled by the Nelson family. Janet and her sister, Peggy, known as Peg to the family, are both lawyers. Peg married Edward Powell, a civil engineer who sat to my right. He's a decent guy, especially for an engineer, and we get along well. Janet was stuck with me, Jerry Parker. I wasn't Irish and I wasn't a lawyer, two facts that caused quite a bit of family drama. If it weren't for her mother, Sally, taking an inexplicable liking to me, I never would have survived the constant criticism from old Jacob and his son, Chris. I was a mason, working with brick, mortar, blocks, and concrete. My father had been one before me, and I never wanted to do anything else. He insisted I go to school to learn the trade, but I resisted at first. My dad could lay block across the entire state and back, staying within a quarter-inch of square and level. I figured I just needed to learn from him. What more was there? It turned out there was a lot more to learn. After 2 years of school, I joined Dad in his business. My education allowed us to improve our materials and mixtures. I seized every opportunity to modernize and mechanize our operations. I introduced Dad to new, faster methods for building with brick and block, while he taught me the difference between slapping up masonry and true craftsmanship. Together, we learned how to maintain the quality of our work while completing it more efficiently. The business expanded, and we hired 3 men to keep up with the increasing workload. At 27, I was a partner in a thriving enterprise when I met Janet. We faced an issue with a supplier who took our deposit but didn't deliver the materials. I went to the Nelson law firm to explore our options. Janet, who was 26 and the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, was assigned our case. She handled it skillfully, and we recovered our money without going to court. By then, I was completely infatuated with her. Every time a payment was late or an order delayed, I tried to convince my father that we needed legal assistance again. Jerry, for crying out loud. He finally exclaimed one afternoon while we were laying blocks for a huge house in the Poconos. Why don't you just ask her out on a date? It would save me a ton of money and help me maintain good relations with our customers and suppliers. We can't sue every Tom, Dick, and Harry we do business with just so you can see that red-headed girl. I was taken aback. Did he really think I just wanted to see Janet again? How could he know what I was thinking? Was it that obvious? You must think I'm blind, my father laughed. It's pretty clear that girl has you all wrapped up. I was the same way with your mother, but I didn't need a flimsy excuse. I kept after her until she finally gave up and married me. She's a lawyer, Dad, I protested. I'm just a mason. She won't be interested in a guy like me. She definitely won't be interested in a whiner, my father shot back. You don't understand what women really want. I may not be an expert, but I know one thing. You are an excellent mason, possibly the best I've ever seen. You never need to apologize to anyone, man or woman, for making an honest living with your hands. She probably deals with enough smooth-talking backstabbers and might be tired of them. Be confident. Ask her out and don't act like you're inferior. If she says no, try again in a week. It took me 2 months to get your mom to agree to go out with me. I spent the rest of the week reflecting on what my father had told me. It's funny how perspective changes over time. At 17, I thought he didn't know anything and being around him made me feel dumber. Now, 10 years later, he seemed to have become incredibly wise. That Friday, I waited in the parking lot for Janet to leave her office. I was still in my work clothes, sweaty and covered in dust. I had resolved to ask her out and knew if I went home to clean up, I'd lose my nerve. Hello, Janet, I started. I don't know if you remember me, but I'm Jerry Parker. Janet interrupted with a laugh. Of course I remember you, Jerry. Are you having another issue with your suppliers? Actually, I'm having trouble thinking about anything but you, Janet, I admitted. Would you like to go out to dinner or see a movie with me? I hope you'll at least take a shower first. I hadn't noticed her brother, Chris, approaching from behind. He had heard the entire conversation I thought was private. So, sis, are you really going out with this hard-working guy? Maybe he'll treat you to McDonald's and a documentary about the Hoover Dam. And if he so much as touches you, we'll know. Dusty fingerprints all over you, he remarked snidely. From his looks and comments, I quickly deduced he was Janet's brother. Resorting to physical confrontation would have been a mistake, so I decided to salvage some pride by walking away. Just then, I recalled my father's advice. Janet, will you go out with me? I repeated. Janet glanced from me to her smirking brother. She took my hand and pulled me aside. Walk with me for a bit, Jerry. We don't need this jackal eavesdropping on our conversation, do we? She said rhetorically. We walked across the lot to a small park. She sat on a bench and gestured for me to join her. Jerry, you've just met my brother, Chris. I love him, but he's snobbish and self-centered. My dad is pretty much the same. Whenever guys, now men, come to our house to take me out, the two of them act like jackals. If I agree to go out with you, expect them to ridicule and insult you. No one who takes me or my sister Peg out is ever good enough, Janet sighed. Ask yourself if being with me is worth the misery and torment you'll face from my family. I'm telling you this because I'd love to go out with you, but I don't want you to suffer because of them. If you've changed your mind after meeting Chris and hearing about my family, I'll understand, she concluded. Would 7 o'clock be okay? I asked. That marked the beginning of a challenging courtship. Her brother and father were the most unpleasant pair I'd ever met. They did everything they could to discourage me, but I kept coming back because I was deeply in love with Janet. We married just over a year and a half later. It took some time, but even old Jacob and Chris eventually accepted me. Having our 2 children, Sharon and Earl, certainly didn't hurt my standing in the family. It's funny how even the most difficult son-in-law can produce the best grandchildren. Janet's mom, Sally, had been my strongest supporter from the start. I never knew why, but I was grateful for her kindness. After 17 years of marriage to her daughter, Sally treats me like a son. Janet's cousin usually made the 4th in our card games, but he couldn't make it this time. Chris had invited David, which was problematic. David had a bad case of verbal diarrhea and an exaggerated sense of his charm with women. He was Chris's best friend and had even dated Janet a few times before she went to law school. Suffice to say, he was a pain in my ass. During the 6 months I spent in Montrose, I slept with at least 10 different women, David boasted. 7 of them were married. There's just something exhilarating about getting involved with another man's wife. David, that sounds incredibly risky, Eddie cautioned. You could end up getting shot or tangled in lawsuits. Professionally, it could ruin your reputation. No risk, no reward, David laughed. That bad boy image actually boosts business. Men are intimidated, women are intrigued. They see me as macho and seek my counsel. You might target the wrong woman, David, Eddie warned. She could report you to her husband, and you'd be kicked out in a heartbeat for bothering a married woman. Jacob won't be in charge much longer, David said nonchalantly. Chris will take over soon, and he won't pay any attention to baseless allegations from jealous husbands, right, Chris? I'd do my best for you, David, but it's wise not to put yourself in that position. My sisters will also have a significant say in firm decisions, Chris reasoned. Then I suppose I'll have to charm them into agreement, David grinned. I threw my cards on the table and stood up. I'm done with this game and this arrogant jerk, I declared. Hey, it's not my fault you can't satisfy your wife, David retorted. I'm just fulfilling a need for neglected wives, and I bet Janet is one of them. You miserable, worthless prick, I hissed. If you so much as look at Janet the wrong way, I'll rip your heart out and shove it up your ass. Chris and Eddie both stood, trying to calm me down. That's just David's sense of humor, Chris soothed. Don't take it personally, Jerry. He didn't mean anything by it. The hell I didn't, snarled David. You can't expect a bricklayer to understand or satisfy women. They prefer men with power and savoir-faire, if you even know what that means. You pompous weasel. I spat. I've said my piece. Stay away from Janet. I'm not shaking, Cement Boy. I've decided to accept your challenge. In a few weeks, I'll be in bed with your wife, David predicted. By the time I'm done, she'll have forgotten all about you. I started around the table, but Chris and Eddie quickly intervened. He's just trying to provoke you, Eddie reasoned. Janet wouldn't give him the time of day, and you know it. Don't let his mouth and your temper land you in a world of trouble. Well, screw you too, Eddie, shouted David. Just for that alone, I'm going to sleep with Peg too. I'm going to show those two how a real man knows how to pleasure a woman. David was practically foaming at the mouth as he spoke, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal. I gripped Eddie's shoulder, holding him back. I wasn't sure he could handle David, and frankly, if things escalated, I wanted the satisfaction of dealing with that bastard myself. The game is over, Chris announced. I'm asking both of you, Eddie and Jerry, to please leave. We all need to cool down." Chris was right. We needed to take a step back. It was his house, after all. When a man asks me to leave his place, I respect that. And when I ask someone to leave mine, they'd better be out the door before I finish my sentence. A man's house is his castle. Eddie and I made our way to the door, Eddie still muttering under his breath. I wasn't any happier. David was a miserable prick. I decided not to tell Janet about the whole affair until things settled down and I could figure out my next move. One thing was for sure, David would regret any trouble he caused my family. By Monday evening, Janet met me at the door with a cold beer and a barrage of questions. "I heard you left the card game early Saturday night, Jerry. Why was that?" she probed. I'm a terrible liar, and I had thought this over. I decided to just tell Janet the truth. She's smart and can handle herself. "Chris asked both Eddie and me to leave," I said plainly. "There's more to it than that, isn't there, Jerry?" Janet pressed. "You threatened David. You told him to stay away from me, didn't you?" "I consider it a warning, not a threat, Janet. No man is going to talk about sleeping with my wife while I'm still breathing," I replied calmly. "I'm sure David didn't use those exact words," Janet remarked. "He told me all about how hostile you were to him. He thinks you're still jealous because I dated him long before I met you, and Chris pretty much agrees with David's version. You lost your temper and overreacted to an innocent comment, didn't you?" For some reason, Chris has his head so far up David's ass, he can't get enough oxygen to feed his brain. They both seem to think your father's about done with the firm, and that Chris will be the next Nelson to rule the business, with David right by his side, entertaining Chris's sisters and anyone else he can. That's pretty much the gist of their conversation, I responded. "Jerry, I know that can't be accurate. Peg and I will have a say in any decisions regarding the company, and Chris knows it. David must know that as well," Janet reasoned. "That's why he's trying to manipulate you and Peg into seeing things his way. He seems to believe that once he gets involved with the Nelson girls, they'll honor his requests just for another chance to be with him. It looks like your fate is sealed, at least in David's mind." "Jerry, Chris is my brother. He would never condone those words or actions from David," Janet replied indignantly. "You're blowing everything out of proportion. I never knew you to be this jealous." I reached down, placed my hands under Janet's arms, and lifted her so her face was very close to mine. "Janet, I love you more than you'll ever realize. That said, I will never tolerate any infidelity, nor will I stand by and allow that asshole to attempt to ruin my family. Make no mistake about that. I understand why you might think Chris and David would have more couth than to say what I told you. I'll cut you some slack because Chris is your brother and you love him. Just don't fall for David's bullshit," I warned. "You're such a big, strong man, holding a little girl like me up like this. Do you think I'm afraid of you, Jerry Parker?" Janet laughed suddenly. "I know you love me completely and will never hurt me. The kids are at Mom's tonight, so I suggest you either put me down or show me why I don't need another man, if you're up to it, that is." That's the way it was with Janet. She would drive me crazy and annoy me with all kinds of asinine stuff, and then suddenly demand I make love to her. I think it was her way of ensuring I would listen to her and keep me mollified. It always worked. I carried her into the bedroom and made her realize I was all the man she could ever need. At least, that's what I believed. She reinforced my conviction that I couldn't love her any more than I already did. I knew that for sure. Over time, I realized that Janet rarely mentioned David, and that bothered me. She worked with him every day. Why wouldn't she talk about him? My bond with my brother-in-law, Eddie, strengthened following the heated card game incident. He was livid that David would insinuate that Peg might be unfaithful. David had really ruffled Eddie's feathers. Whenever Eddie and I met, we dissected David's actions and speculated about his intentions and associations. Eddie confided in me that he had enlisted Nancy Wall, old Jacob's secretary, to keep a discreet watch and report anything suspicious. He even explained to Nancy why he was so interested in the workplace dynamics. Fortunately, Nancy had no fondness for David Phillips and was more than willing to assist. So far, Nancy hadn't reported anything out of the ordinary, This lack of intel only fueled my anxiety. The idea that David could suddenly turn over a new leaf just didn't sit right with me. I shadowed Janet closely and showered her with attention, which she seemed to appreciate, rewarding me multiple times in the evenings. The family had organized a grand celebration for Sally and Jacob's 50th wedding anniversary. It was to be a full gathering with all the kids, grandkids, cousins, nieces, nephews, and other family members. Skipping a family party in an Irish family required a doctor's note. Janet and Peg had been handling most of the arrangements, with some help from Chris and his wife, Bridget. Chris had met Bridget during a summer when she was temping at the firm. No one ever questioned Bridget's standing within the family, unlike the scrutiny Eddie and I faced when we first started courting Chris's sisters. The fact that Bridget's last name was Russell seemed to carry more weight in the Nelson family than Eddie's surname Powell. I never quite understood the reasoning behind it. The party was scheduled for Friday, July 15th, the exact date of Jacob and Sally's golden anniversary. I noticed Janet's increasing tension as the party approached. She spent a lot of time at her parents' house and on the phone, meticulously ensuring that everything was in order, a trait that made her an excellent lawyer, carrying her thoroughness into everyday life to ward off any surprises. It was noon on the Friday of the party when I received a call from Eddie. "Jerry, Nancy just called." She overheard David on the phone, arranging to meet someone at the Tuck Him Inn at 3 p.m. today, Eddie disclosed. "I'm not sure where Peg is, and if I call her cell, she'll just tell me she's anywhere. Do you know where Janet is?" She mentioned having some last-minute errands, like picking up the flowers and all that. "I'll inform the guys I'm leaving early and head over to the motel before 3. I'll keep you posted," I assured Eddie. "Bullshit," Eddie retorted. "I'll be at the corner coffee shop near my office. Grab me on your way." The problem was, it wasn't on my way. It was already past 2, and picking up Eddie would eat into precious time. Still, he had been keeping me informed. "All right, Eddie, just make sure you're ready to jump in when I pull up. We can't afford any delays," I replied, hanging up and hurrying to my truck. I arrived at the coffee shop at 10 to 3 and picked Eddie up. I acknowledged him with a nod and quickly merged back into traffic. It was going to be tight. I parked in a convenience store lot adjacent to the motel at 1 minute to 3, positioning us with a clear view of the rooms. It was an older place with about 20 units, all facing the lot in front. I turned off the engine. "There he is," Eddie exclaimed. "The bastard looks pretty cheerful, doesn't he?" David was whistling as he approached a room. He swiped the key, went inside, and closed the door. Eddie turned to me, silently asking what we should do next. I pondered the situation. Should we confront the bastard? What if he was with a woman not related to us? What if she hadn't arrived yet? We hadn't fully thought this through. "I don't want to do anything rash and land in jail, Eddie," I reasoned. "Let's wait and see who else shows up. Chances are, if any damage has been done, it's already too late." "That's exactly what I was thinking," Eddie concurred. "This probably isn't David's first rendezvous. Man, I hope it isn't one of our wives." We sat there for what felt like 15 minutes, waiting for something to happen. Finally, David emerged, closed the door behind him, and walked back to his car. As he sped away, Eddie and I continued our vigil. A few minutes later, the door opened again, and a woman stepped out. "Son of a bitch," Eddie blurted out as we both watched Janet quickly make her way around the side of the building. My heart pounded so intensely, it was almost deafening. We both knew my life was falling apart. "Jerry, let Peg talk to Janet, okay?" Eddie urged. "She can't really like that jerk. It was just a horrible mistake. I bet she already regrets it." "She damn well will soon enough," I growled, firing up the engine and leaving the parking lot. Eddie was still trying to soothe me when we pulled up in front of his office. "If the roles were reversed, Eddie, what would you do?" I demanded as he got out of the truck. "I'd do something impulsive and regret it later. I know that," Eddie admitted. But you're smarter than that, Jerry. Think about the kids, if not yourself." Why the hell didn't Janet think of the kids? I shot back. "I'll handle this my way." I wasn't Irish, but cold beer always helped me relax and think things through. I pulled into a local bar and downed a couple of beers. No brilliant solutions came to mind. I realized I wasn't the clever type. I just put my head down and charged forward. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but it was my way. The full significance of Janet in my life started to hit me. She was more than just someone I slept with, though she was great at that. She was my friend, my reason for living. Suddenly, I felt utterly alone and adrift, my heart aching like never before. My cell phone rang. It was Janet. "Jerry, where are you? You're supposed to be at Mom's by now. It's after 5 and everyone's wondering where you are," she snapped. I thought about telling her to go to hell, but decided against it. What better time to confront her and let her whole family know what kind of person she really was? That would give her father, Jacob, something to chew on. It was too late to change out of my work clothes, but I didn't care. If the Nelsons were so offended by a working man, I might as well piss off the whole damn family. Within 10 minutes, I found myself in the backyard of Janet's parents' estate, my jaw clenched and my temper nearing its boiling point. David's Mercedes parked at the curb had set me off. This party was about to get interesting. "Jerry, let's have a drink." My treat, Eddie called out before I could find Janet or David. It was clear he wanted to intercept me, trying to pacify my rising anger, but I wasn't having any of it. Ignoring him, I continued around the corner of the house. That's when I bumped into Sally. "Jerry, I'm so glad you're here," she said with a radiant smile. "The party wouldn't have been the same without you." She wrapped her arms around me, and I leaned down to kiss her. Sally was one person I never wanted to hurt, but the storm brewing within me was about to unleash, and when it did, there would be collateral damage. Over Sally's head, I spotted David at the bar, animatedly waving his drink and spouting some ridiculous story. I stepped around Sally and headed straight for him. David noticed my approach and must have read my intentions in my eyes. He set his drink on the counter and faced me as I closed the distance. "I warned you, you miserable prick," I hissed. "Now it's time to pay the piper." Out of nowhere, his right fist crashed into my chin. My head snapped back, and I felt a disturbing crunch in my neck. Shaking it off, I smiled darkly at David. "So, Janet told you everything," David snarled. I knew the bitch couldn't keep her mouth shut. In the next moment, his right hand connected with the left side of my face, the impact reverberating in the otherwise silent yard. I wasn't particularly beloved by the Nelson family, but Janet was. David had just insulted her at her own family's event. Rubbing my cheek, it dawned on me that David clearly underestimated the honor code in real Irish families. I grabbed him by the lapels and slammed him against the nearby tool, shed with such force that I wondered if the structure might collapse. Propping him up with my left hand, I pulled back my right fist, ready to end this. "Jerry." It was Janet. She hadn't exactly yelled. It was more the serious tone she reserved for grave offenses. Instinctively, I halted, my fist hovering, ready to obliterate David Phillips's smug face. "Janet, I'll deal with you later," I rasped. "Right now, I'm kinda busy." Suddenly, Janet stepped in front of me, pressing her head against the arm still propping up David. "Deal with me later," she repeated, her voice full of incredulity. "I don't know what you think you're saying, Jerry, but you'll deal with me right now." This prick just admitted everything, Janet. Not that it mattered, I added. "I saw you leave that goddamn motel today." Janet flinched as if struck. She raised her chin, meeting my gaze head-on. "If you believe I would ever betray you for this piece of shit or anyone, then go ahead and beat me. I deserve it if I did what you claim. Slap me around, tough guy." I had never seen her so emotional. Her lip quivered, her voice wavered. She knew she could cut my heart out, and I wouldn't lift a hand against her. Yet, a nagging doubt began to creep in. "If you trust me, if you love me the way I think you do, you'll let him go and let me explain. If I mean so little to you that you throw me away over something you think might have happened, then go ahead and clobber him. Smack me around too, because any woman who would cheat on a husband as loyal and devoted as you are deserves no better," she concluded. Now I was really between a rock and a hard place. David was starting to recover and squirm. If I was going to deck him, I needed to do it now. But what if Janet hadn't cheated? What if there was another explanation for her being at that motel? I looked at Janet and realized I had no choice. I couldn't give up on her. I couldn't refuse her anything. She still stirred feelings in me, even after all these years. I released David. My head snapped back as he swung a haymaker over Janet's shoulder, connecting with my left eye. It made my knees turn rubbery. I heard Janet curse, followed by the unmistakable sound of fists on flesh. I'd been around enough fights to know what that noise meant. Janet's arms wrapped around me, helping me stay upright as I staggered back. Shaking my head to clear it, I realized my vision in my left eye was blurry, but I didn't need perfect sight to see that Chris Nelson was beating the living daylights out of his former best friend. Eddie and a couple of cousins rushed in, pulling Chris away from David. Chris was panting heavily, his face a deep shade of red. He rubbed his hands over his face and took a deep breath. "Get this cowardly fool out of here and do it fast. If he's still in my sight in 10 seconds, I can't be held responsible for what I might do," he shouted. Several hands grabbed David, half dragging and half carrying him out to the front. Chris put an arm over my shoulder and wrapped the other around Janet's waist, guiding us toward the kitchen. Inside, a few people were watching through the open door. "Could we have a few minutes, just Janet, Jerry, and me?" Chris requested. Everyone quickly exited, and Chris shut the door behind them. "Janet, Bridget just confessed to me about how you stepped in today, preventing her from making a huge mistake. I'm furious with her, but I respect her courage for coming clean. I can't believe I thought that bastard was my friend while he was trying to seduce my wife. Thanks, Janet," Chris said with a choked voice, hugging his sister tightly. I was still dazed from David's blows and struggled to understand the situation. David had slept with Bridget as well. What had Janet done? Chris let go of Janet and extended his hand to me. Though confused, I accepted it and we shook. "I owe you an apology, Jerry, for not taking your perspective seriously and firing David after that card game. Eddie mentioned he saw Janet leave the motel today. You couldn't have known she went there to confront Bridget, not to get involved with that scumbag," Chris explained. Obviously, Bridget listened to her and left. I assume Janet stayed to deal with David. Peg and I both felt David's seductive attempts, but we had already discussed his outburst the night you and Eddie left your place, Chris. We could barely hide our disdain. Then we noticed he shifted his focus to Bridget. When she left early today, I had a bad feeling and followed her, Janet revealed. Bridget was long gone when David showed up. He and I negotiated his departure. He agreed to announce tomorrow that he'd found a better position in California and would give his 2 weeks' notice. In turn, the firm wouldn't pursue any of his ethical violations, Jen admitted. I didn't realize Jerry saw me leave the motel. No wonder he was so furious at David. "Ha, hell," I exclaimed. "I messed up again, Janet. When will I learn to trust you? I embarrassed you in front of everyone," I fretted. "I'd hardly say that," laughed Sally, Janet's mother, as she stepped into the room, followed by Eddie, Peg, and my 2 kids. "Everyone thought you were about to kill that miserable guy. If Janet hadn't intervened, Phillips would be searching for his head right now, and the cops would be searching for you. Not that you didn't have a good reason, Jerry. If someone insulted my Janet in front of me, I'd be just as furious. I'm proud of Janet for marrying you. I'm also proud of her for stopping you from seriously hurting that idiot. I had a feeling you'd calm down once Janet got involved," chuckled Sally. "I always had the same effect on her father. You went all soft and calm when she came near." "Weren't you worried about me killing David, Mom?" asked Chris. "Son, you did what you had to, but let's be honest. You're a lawyer. Your hands aren't exactly lethal weapons. Now, look at Jerry's hands, chest, and shoulders. Phillips was in real danger for a second there. You gave him a few bruises, but he'll be fine in a few days." "What about Jerry, Mom?" asked Peg. "His eye is swollen shut, and there's a nasty bruise on his cheek. Any suggestions to ease the swelling?" Only then did I realize my left eye was completely shut and my head was throbbing. "Janet, take your husband upstairs get him undressed and into the jacuzzi. I'll send up an ice pack with one of the kids. Then get yourself undressed and show him how much you love him. We'll still be partying when you come back, grinned Sally. Mom, shrieked Peg. Is that any way to talk to your daughter, especially in front of her children? Peg, don't get all prim and proper with me, laughed Sally. These kids, as well as my grown children, should know a few secrets to a lasting marriage. It definitely isn't by withholding love and affection, especially when your husband's been beaten defending the family. Go on, Janet, and take care of your man. Less than an hour later, Janet and I rejoined the party and mingled with the guests. It seemed everyone had heard about Sally's advice for a long marriage and teased us, ensuring we'd follow her advice. Personally, I think Sally stumbled upon a recipe for success. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.